John chapter 5. John chapter 5, this guy, this invalid, he's for the invalid for 38 years. Okay, and so this really bothers me. Is this guy a good guy or is he a bad egg? And I keep trying to make the case with, good Christian Lutheran people who honor and value my word and treat my words like they're raindrops from heaven, like Jesus himself is speaking. And they go, oh, Steve has spoken. We must believe this. But in this case, sorry, that was a little sarcastic. Never believe what I say. Always verify it with the word God. And people are doing that, going, well, you know, Jesus said, get up, take your mat, and walk. And he does, and he's carrying his mat, which it's a little fuzzy on whether, you're not supposed to carry a load. Is carrying your mat a load? You're not supposed to, it's like, could he have gone home and dropped off his mat on the Sabbath, or were he supposed to just leave his mat there? I don't know. But regardless, it's not lawful. And, you got the religious leaders, the highest and best people, the Jews, are saying, hey, you're not supposed to carry your mat. And so he says in verse 12, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. And you're going, okay, is he throwing Jesus under the bus there? Well, no, he's saying, this is quite similar, if you will, in chapter 9. And we are to hold chapter 5 along with the Samaritan woman in chapter 4 and the blind man in chapter 5. 9 verse 10. How then were your eyes open? The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go into Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. Notice this guy, the blind guy, he actually knows who Jesus's name is. If somebody healed me, I would probably forget their name immediately too, because my brain works that way. But I would hope I would go, hey, thank you for healing me. May I ask who you are? Because I would like to honor you. Okay. Where is he? I don't know. That's chapter 9. In chapter 5, Jesus hunts the invalid down and says to him, see, you are well. Sin no more and nothing worse can happen to you. Now, there's a grammatical issue here that utterly baffles me. That phrase, sin no more, does that mean stop the sinning that you're doing, or is it a general admonition of do not sin in general? And I'm gathering the impression, at least if you look at the NET full notes, which I've advised you to do before, it's really good. Don't always agree with them, but they're smarter than I am, so you probably should. So they say, no, this is more of a general thing. He's not saying sin no more. You need to stop doing that sin that you were doing with the Pharisees, which I'm inclined to interpret it this way. But instead, I want you to think in terms of sin in the Gospel of John. Verify this for me for yourself. There's no sin mentioned in the Gospel of John other than not believing in Jesus. The Holy Spirit's going to convict them of sin because why? Not because they're adulterers, not because they're murderers. This is in 16, I think. The Holy Spirit will convict the world of sin because they do not believe in me. Jesus doesn't go around saying, if you look at a woman with sin, with lust in your eyes, you've committed adultery with her. If you hate your brother, you have killed him. Not in this gospel. For the Gospel of John, the only sin is not believing in Jesus. And so I'm kind of wondering here if what Jesus is saying is, I made you well. You really ought to believe in me. That's what I'm thinking is what Jesus is saying, just in the context of the gospel. Someone brought up the woman caught in adultery, and there's a question of whether John, the guy that should be in the Gospel of John. I'm inclined, like one guy said, it should be in the Gospel of Luke, and you got that, go and sin no more business. again, to me, that doesn't fit in the Gospel of John. So if that's your one example, I kind of go, yeah, I don't know. But even there, sin in the Gospel of John is not believing in Jesus. So what does he do in verse 15? He doesn't say, Jesus, teach me. He doesn't do what the blind guy does in chapter 9 when Jesus comes up to him. The blind man has never seen Jesus with his eyes. And Jesus comes up to him and says, do you believe in the Son of Man? What are you talking about? Anyway, the guy says, oh, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And he goes, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Again, these two, the gospel writer is brilliant because he sets Nicodemus, who's kind of fuzzy. It's like, is this a good guy or a bad guy? And then chapter 4, we've got the Samaritan woman who's just, whoa, could this be the Christ? And people came to faith in Jesus. They believe in Jesus based on her testimony. Nobody's coming to faith in Jesus based on the invalid's testimony, I'll tell you that. But in chapter 9, I love this. The blind man, he's going, oh, I don't know where this is. But they say to him, tell us again how he's, I've already told you. Do you want to become his disciples too? You see the invalid doing that. And so, again, note for yourselves, and don't just give this guy the benefit of the doubt in the immediate context and say, well, it doesn't, he went and told the Jews. They wanted to know. So, because here's the other thing. The blind man got kicked out of the synagogue. The gospel writer, John the gospel writer, is writing into a context when the Jews were kicking Jewish Christians out of the synagogue because they were Jewish Christians. If you follow Jesus, you're going to be kicked out of the synagogue. And so the Jews would have seen the invalid and go, 2 thumbs up, good guy, you can stay in the synagogue because you told us who this Jesus is so we could persecute him and kick him around, which is where we're left with the invalid story. Jesus having to defend his healing of an invalid on the Sabbath day. Whereas in chapter 9, he gets kicked out of the synagogue for wanting to believe in Jesus and be a disciple of Jesus. So put it in the context, compare the invalid to the Samaritan woman in chapter 4, compare the invalid to the blind man in chapter 9. And there, I think you'll see, just in the contrast, how far short the invalid falls compared to those two who just, I go, wow, those two are awesome. All right. I don't know if I gave any gospel other than note how Jesus initiates. It's always from Jesus healing us, and then it's all about then our response, which we find out later it's by the Holy Spirit, don't we? Yeah. So there's your gospel. And it's through Jesus' death and resurrection that we get there eventually. All right. God's peace.